Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the Asian Pacific American Medical Student Association podcast. From roundtable discussions of current health topics, to recaps of our panels with distinguished leaders in the healthcare field, to even meeting current student leaders within the organization, this is White Coats and Rice. My name is Annie Nguyen, and I'm a postbac at Stanford University and a member of the leadership committee here at APAMSA. I'll be your host for today. This is our Ask Me Anything series, where each month we spotlight an extraordinary physician who shares their insights on medicine, life, and everything in between. This is your chance to ask questions, hear their stories, and learn from their incredible experiences. Whether you're curious about their journey, their day-to-day, or their views on the future of medicine, nothing is off the table. So let's dive in. I wanted to first introduce, of course, our guest of honor, Dr. Caroline Park, who specializes in emergency general surgery, trauma, and surgical critical care. Her medical career has spanned Boston, New York, Los Angeles, and most recently Dallas, Texas, as she has joined the UT Southwestern faculty in 2018. Her research focuses on surgical critical care practices, outcomes in trauma patients, and integrating new technologies. And we're very lucky to have Dr. Park here with us today, so let's give her a little round of applause. And before we jump into some questions, Dr. Park, I just wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself further and maybe describe your career, because it does seem like you've been, all over the place.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you to you guys. I really looked forward to this. In our last sort of interaction, it was wonderful, and I'm just so grateful to be able to do this. I've always wanted an opportunity to kind of give back to my community, and I never really quite figured out how to do it. So there you guys are, just showed up. It was perfect, perfect timing. Not really much else to add. This is my first job in Dallas, and I've loved it. I am a big city girl, and I think that might, come up in some of the questions that maybe some of you guys have. So to not be afraid to kind of pick up and maybe move to another place, because you'd be surprised by how much you learn. And, these days it's not too difficult to meet your family and be connected. So be brave.
I really appreciate that. So could you describe more about what was the driving force between moving to Los Angeles? You were there for a short stint, I think, before the pandemic, and then now you're in Texas. Was it the job specifically, like trauma surgery?
Yeah, actually, so one thing that you'll notice, and I think it sounds like a lot of students here are in medical school. Some of you guys might be, applying to medical school. It is almost like a railroad. You kind of get onto the medical school train, and it's kind of just goes in one direction. So honestly, the most difficult obstacle, in my opinion, is getting into medical school. There's so much that you have to do these days anyway, right? So observerships, clinical hours, research, all those things in order to make it. And it's very, very competitive. But once you're on that train, whether it's good or bad, you have preferences for where you want to go. And your fate is to some degree sort of determined by an algorithm, like a computer, right? Like just how it was for medical school. So it's kind of the same thing with fellowship, which is advanced training. So for example, anyone who wants to go into surgery has to do a surgery residency, right? A general surgery residency. If you want to go into orthopedic surgery, you have to do a residency in orthopedic surgery. However, if you want to go beyond being a general surgeon, which is still a really great job, you would have to do a fellowship. Now that's more advanced training. That could be anywhere between 1 and 3 years potentially. And, it could be anywhere from pediatric surgery to surgical oncology to what I do, which is acute care surgery, trauma, critical care. So at that point, you actually have a choice in where you want to be, because these programs now become a little bit more diverse. So medical school, you have to take the same classes, anatomy, biochemistry, all that stuff. But when it comes to fellowship, there are what I describe as certain flavors. So maybe there's a fellowship where you want to learn more critical care, or one where you want to operate on really big hernias. And you start to see those differences in those fellowships. So you kind of get a sense of what you want when you're in residency. Like, I really want to focus on this, so I'm going to look for that place. So you have a little bit more control. I guess what I'm trying to say is you get a little bit more control as you're on that, sort of that train, and you can kind of figure out what your destination is going to be. And so that's what led to me in Los Angeles was I was willing to come out of my bubble. I've been, was born and raised in the Northeast. I've survived multiple storms. I was getting tired of the weather. I didn't like the fact that it was always dark when I woke up and it was dark when I went to bed. And I wanted to just try something different. And I think that was the best decision I ever made. I met a completely different group of people, like they do things differently, and I had so much fun. So, and it's only a couple years of your life. You're not committed to staying out there. So I would highly recommend that you guys kind of go outside your bubble and explore. That way you can look back and say, you know what, I tried everything and I don't regret it.
For sure. And you're right, Boston storms are absolutely no joke. So I'm glad that you got some sunshine in LA. In terms of what was, directing your freight train, if we want to call it that, what drew you to trauma surgery or just surgery in general?
I am very biased because I believe that surgery is the best because not only do you get to diagnose something, you can treat it either minimally with medications or medical management to like maximum management, right? So like with a scalpel. There's not a lot of people that can do that. And I think that's why general surgery is even better because we truly take care of the whole patient. Outside of like, the head and doing bony injuries and things like that. My scope of practice can be anywhere between taking, an inflamed appendix out of someone to, sewing a heart closed after, someone got stabbed or shot in the heart to, unfortunately patients with, really bad peripheral arterial disease and had diabetic ulcers, and now it's grown to infection and they need amputation. It's really wide. And I'm very glad that, we get such rigorous training in residency. The reason why it is 5 years long is because you have to know your anatomy. And not only that, you have to understand the disease processes. You have to understand, what are the best options for this patient, right? And then, of course, like the last point is like doing the operation, right? The technical part. So I feel so grateful that we can constantly move from, making sure we master all the concepts and the anatomy to like doing the operation and then managing everything else afterwards.
So I think that there's a aspect of diversity here that you're highlighting, especially in general surgery. And for someone who's considering specialties, that could be overwhelming to them. So to kind of clue them in, could you describe a typical day in your life?
Absolutely. So let's say I'll describe a call day. So I wake up around 6 a.m, which I know sounds very late to you guys because you guys are probably waking up much earlier to go to the hospital and see your patients and pre-round. But I go to work. We do our morning sign out because sign out is very important. We have to talk about all the patients that came in from last night, all the ones that need an operation, other people that are very sick that we need to know about. And we kind of prioritize, what we're going to do for the day. So for people who love a lot of control and wanting to know exactly what they're going to do a few days prior, what I do is probably not the best for them because I literally roll into work and that's what's on the list. But that being said, there are more common things that we do as general surgeons in acute care surgery, and that's a lot of it is appendicitis, hernias, cholecystitis, for sure. And some other things like there are patients in the ICU intensive care unit who need tracheostomies, feeding tubes. It really spent biopsies. There's so many things that I could be doing. So between really 7 a.m. and 7 the next day, I'm in the hospital. We get called about patients in the emergency room who might need a surgical, they have a, potential surgical problem. I'm operating. So in between cases, I'm seeing these patients. In between cases, I'm rounding on patients who are already admitted. And then that happens pretty much throughout the whole night. And thankfully, our cases are not very long. Now, some of you may already be in clerk shifts where you're operating and standing for long periods of time. I have to say that our cases are not as long as some of the other specialties like, vascular surgery or surgical oncology, where you're maybe standing for like 6-7 hours at a time. Our cases are pretty short, mostly 1 to 3 hours. So I like that. I like the speed. I like being able to move between cases and patients. I prefer more volume of patients and taking care of them versus like the length of the case.
You mentioned before the call started that this is just an interesting week because you're actually in the ICU. So what is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So So let's say I've recovered from that 24-hour call. I get to go home. I don't have to go. I do not have to go to work the next day, and I only take maybe like 4 of those calls a month. So I don't want people to think like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can stay up for that long. Every other day. That's not my life. Okay, and I think a lot of people kind of get scared or intimidated by that kind of lifestyle, but it is very, very doable. You just need to kind of pace yourself and give yourself a break and let yourself recover. So the other sphere of acute care surgery, so there's 3 in my mind. There's emergency general surgery, which is what I basically just described. And then there's a trauma, which is, trauma patients, trauma surgery. And then there's critical care surgery, which is kind of in the middle. And there's some people that like to gravitate towards one versus the other. And there's some people that are like a perfect Venn diagram and they like to be just in the middle. And there are other people that really like more of the trauma. I would say I love all of that stuff. I can't say I prefer more than another. I really do love taking care of trauma patients, but I love every aspect of it. Surgery is very unique in that you're going back to like medical school and you are looking at the patient holistically again. You are literally looking at them from head to toe. The the neurologic system, the cardiovascular system, pulmonology, GI, GU, infectious. I mean, literally we're looking at every single system and making sure that we are addressing it. If there is an issue, if there's an infection, we're treating it well, things like that. And I love that part because it brings me back to all the things that some of you probably wish that you don't ever have to remember, like things like the coagulation cascade, right? You'd be surprised. There are certain things you actually do need to remember. The Krebs cycle hasn't really been very applicable for me, but there are definitely things that, there's a reason why you learn all these things in medical school. So I love it. And the one thing that people sort of have some, I wouldn't say critical of acute care surgery, but they're like, you never really get to establish a relationship with the patient. You guys operate, they're gone the next day. I would say that's not really the case. I think in the ICU, you could, stay with the patient the whole week. That's enough for me to feel like I have established a relationship with the family, to have rapport, for them to remember me in clinic. That's good enough for me. I think some people wish for more. I think that's totally fine.
That was an incredibly insightful answer. And I think that you provided some really helpful metrics for anyone who might be considering this specialty in particular, such as, preference on hours or volume. One thing is the emotional and kind of psychological burden that comes with surgery. I think that's maybe one reason why students will tend to hesitate. Can you describe what that experience has been like for you and how you personally address that?
I think the biggest thing, and this is not unique to surgery, is being able to talk about things. It's probably, and I don't want to make too many stereotypes about being an Asian American, but it's not a strength that I had growing up, was to talk about things, especially with, with my parents. It was all about like all the good things that you do are positive reinforced, and then all the things that you don't do well, or, you would never do that again. Or even if you did do well, it was like, well, we kind of expected that. So,
Right.
You got an A-. Why didn't you get an A instead of an A-? You have to be willing to check your ego and realize that you're human, and all of that sorrow and stress and tragedy is going to affect you at some point. And if it doesn't, then I don't know what to say. If it does, you're human and that's totally natural, and I would only expect that. And I hope that you are all surrounded by people who are willing to like debrief. Like, for example, if a patient comes in, and unfortunately this happens more often than we want, who comes in, bleeding to death or has been shot, and where we're trying to do our best, but ultimately we can't save that patient, it is a very hard thing for the medical students to witness. And I try to prepare them in advance, but you can only prepare someone so much. When they go through all that and they see kind of like really truly how, like, I don't want to say violent, but it's very involved. It's very graphic, right? It's real. You can't just ignore that and just say, okay, well, let's move on to the next patient. You have to really talk about it. And I think it's really important. Sometimes you're busy and you just don't have the time right now. But I would say if you feel empowered, you should feel empowered. And I hope that the people around you, your residents, your fellows, your staff, you say, you know what, we need to talk about this. So let's just find some time and talk about this and just open it up and just see what people say. That's what I would suggest. Because at any point in your careers, all of you going into medical school, you will have to deal with death at some point. You will have to deal with something really tragic. And it's going to affect you in a way that you did not predict. Maybe you won't be able to sleep at night. Maybe you're like running longer and you're just like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was running for a whole hour. That happened to me the other day. I guess something was on my mind because I was running for a whole hour and I didn't realize I'd run like 7 miles. I'm like, gosh, I guess something is on my mind. So we all have different ways of kind of coping with that. So find some way to talk about it and some way to, in a healthy way, and some way to cope with it also in a healthy way.
Embracing those really intense visceral emotions instead of shoving them down and pretending like they're not there. As someone who has moved up in leadership and had various leadership roles, such as a medical director and now an associate professor, have you seen a more positive trend towards having those kinds of conversations? Or have you seen institutions make more of an effort to create those safer spaces for those conversations to be held? Or what work do you feel like needs to be done there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of institutions are heading towards that if they're not doing it already. Some specialties may, should be doing better than others for sure. I would say that it has to come from your leadership, because if your leaders are not willing to be open and receive that kind of feedback or have those kinds of open conversations, it's not going to sort of percolate down, right? All the layers. So it does have to come from the top, and it has to be sincere too, right? Not just like, oh, just drop by my office whenever. Like, no, you have to be proactive. You reach out to people, you ask them how they're doing, right? And it's not just like, hey, are you doing okay? It's like, hey, like, how's your dog doing? Like, I know there was a bad storm and they get really affected by that. Like those small things like that, that makes a big difference to people. It's hard because we're doing the best we can to take care of patients, and that is enough to do. It's like super exhausting. You're trying to take care of yourself, and now you're trying to take care of your coworkers. Like, it's a lot every day. And you sometimes, like, your best every day, there's this like, it's not really a meme, but it's like your best every day is so different. Sometimes it's like down here and sometimes it's way up there, but that's the best that you can ask from yourself.
For sure. One thing that, just for the sake of transparency and for everyone on the call who's maybe trying to figure out a specialty, where do you feel that surgery falls in that spectrum of this willingness to discuss these things? If you have to be brutally honest.
I'm just like very, very lucky, but I feel like I'm in an environment where it is very transparent and I feel very comfortable. Maybe there's some cultural differences, right? Maybe in certain parts of the country, maybe in certain parts of the world. I mean, I hate to say it, but there are definitely some parts of the world where there's definitely more male surgeons than women surgeons. There's not equal representation of, underrepresented minorities. And there has to be a really good, deliberate effort to maintain diversity with excellence. It is not impossible. People are too comfortable with like the status quo, and it doesn't have to be like that. The status quo can be boring, and sometimes it's not good. It's not helpful for the people working, the patient. All I can say is when you guys are looking for programs, I mean, obviously, most of you are already in medical school, but when you're looking at residencies and fellowships and it's something that you really care about, like representation, look at the classes. What do they look like? It's very easy to look at the residencies to see how well represented they are. Where are they coming from? Are they just coming from the same school that they're associated with? That's probably not a good sign, right? You want to get people who are from all over the place that are going to bring in new ideas. That's how you learn.
So we've touched on some interesting topics of finding community, dealing with difficult things head on. And that is typically done best in community, but there are things that we can do for ourselves to stay grounded. And you had mentioned running as something that is one of your hobbies. I believe you run marathons before, plural actually, which is insane. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you personally like to do to decompress? And maybe we had some specific questions about marathon training, but we can get to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that first of all, I actually hated running when I was smaller, when I was a child. And some of you guys this probably doesn't even happen anymore, but there was something called the President Fitness Challenge in gym. So yeah, you're looking at me like this never happened. So you had to like do this thing where you had to shuttle between two things. You had to like stretch. You had to do a pull-up, and the only thing I could do was stretch. I was terrible at everything else. I could never do a pull-up. I still can't do a pull-up. But it wasn't until maybe college or maybe even after college when I actually ran my first 5K. It was for breast cancer awareness, and I was hooked after that. And I think I was hooked because it was a time where I was totally not distracted. I didn't have my cell phone on me. I could just go out, and it was my time. and I could just focus on me. And that is not easy to find anymore. I know right now you guys probably feel like you have a lot of time, but there will be a time where you have 30 minutes to an hour and you have to be very, very deliberate about what you're how you're going to spend that hour. You're going to spend it on yourself. You spend it on someone else. You're going to spend something that you like to do or something because you feel like you have to do something else for somebody. So whatever it is, it has to bring you joy. If in the past you had 20 hobbies, you may only have time for 2. So, just pick those things very, very wisely. For me, it's like the running is easy. I don't have to go to a gym. I just put on my AirPods. I go outside. I run. I come back. It's very easy for me to do. So long story short, it was not something I loved to do before. It's something I like to do now. You can always start later in your life. My first marathon actually was in Los Angeles and I finished it. The good and bad story of that race is that I wanted to run a 5K, but that was not available that weekend. And so I did the marathon thinking, well, if I don't finish it, at least I tried. And so I finished it and that was awesome. So I don't think I would ever do that again. I'm not a big marathoner. Like the length is too long for me because I just get bored. But half marathons are a great, great distance.
Okay. That's insane. Did you train or you intended to do the 5K, but then you just busted out 26 miles?
I think I might have run up to 9 miles before that, but I never, and this is the thing, like you would think that as someone who's like used to like surgery training and all the things that build up to being a surgeon, like you would think that I would have a good plan with running, but no, I made up my own plan and it turned out fine, I guess. But I would not advise that. I would advise that you actually adhere to a running plan.
That is deeply impressive. I actually ran a marathon in April and it was one of the hardest things I had ever done. And that required so much training. And so,
but have you done something that was less hard and you were like, that was a breeze? Like this was nothing. Hard things put other things in perspective. And I do think that that's why some people push themselves so hard. They do these crazy things, the Spartan races, these marathons, because they're trying to push themselves to the point where like, okay, now any other obstacle that comes my way is like, okay, I can do this. I've done worse. I've been through worse before.
I actually haven't realized that until this conversation, but that's actually like been the metric in my brain. Like it can't be worse than the Big Sur Marathon. Like it does not get worse. Oh, I love this. Okay. So any other hobbies, anything that brings you joy? You said normally it will, whittle down to naturally like 1 or 2 hobbies. Is there anything else that you enjoy outside of running?
I love gardening. I love like being outside gardening. I have lots of indoor plants. I have lots of outdoor plants. I think I like it because you're watching something grow from a seed and you can see the direct effects again with surgery, like the immediate effects of if you abandon something and you don't care for it versus actually nurturing something, paying attention to things, picking all the dead leaves off. I mean, all these things, I think, again, no distractions, away from work, unrelated, focusing on myself. I think these are all things, whatever it can be for you guys, right? That can be your garden or something that you work on. I have tons of cats. And for a while during the pandemic, I was trapping, neutering, releasing cats that were just in our community. I have never been a cat person. I've always had dogs growing up. And there's this thing called the cat distribution system. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they just come into your life. And so that's what happened to us. And we're like, we have to save these cats. And so sequentially, we all got them, neutered or spayed and released them back. And that was my hobby for a couple of years.
So all of these things that you've discovered in Dallas, so gardening, the cat distribution system choosing you multiple times. What is it like living in Dallas? Is it easy to grow plants? Is the cat distribution system more tame now?
I think I feel like I have affected the colony in at least in our neighborhood, so that's a good thing. I've impacted the ecosystem here because of that. I mean, it's hot. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I'm from the Northeast. It's hot, but you just adjust. You just wake up earlier. You go running in the morning. You go running at night. You can grow things, and that the whole caveat here is like grow things that are indigenous to this area, right? Like, and that's the other thing I learned. Like, don't expect to be able to, plant hydrangeas in the middle of the summer and expect them to survive. They're just not used to that. And, I've learned so much about the acidity of the soil and like all these things that I never learned. But that's how you learn, right? You make mistakes. You make mistakes by planting something too late in the summer. It's too hot. So yes, I have tomatoes that I've grown. I have grown like my mom's favorite flowers, herbs lately.
I'm seeing consistent openness to trying new things. It seems like there is no problem with you trying something new, no matter what stage you are in your life. And that definitely seems to have helped you with all these different moves. Is there a ritual or like something that you like to do when you get to a new city, especially for people who are going through transitions right now? What makes it easier to really immerse yourself in a new place?
Yeah, this is not going to surprise you at all, but the first thing I do when I'm in a new city is I go running. I literally just I go running, I find the nearest river, park, whatever, and I just explore. I think it's a great way to see the city. You get to see all the sights, you're exercising. So I would highly recommend that. So if you guys are ever going to conferences, I would say map out the city. Obviously you want to map out a safe route. Make sure, because I've almost done this before, but like you run too far out and then you got to run back the whole distance. So you don't want to make that mistake. And do your research. Like, if it's like Chicago, right? Like, go out to the lake. Do you want to get that slice of deep dish pizza that everyone, talks about somewhere? So I kind of like to make a little, customized itinerary, I guess. That's another thing I like to do is I go traveling. And so I'll map out a road and say, okay, I'm going to go here. I'm going to, sample this, go to this coffee place, all these kinds of things. So you can make it fun. And sometimes around conferences, there is a little bit of downtime. So I would recommend that you guys do that because it can be sometimes a little like overwhelming to be in a giant conference with tons of people and just be in a suit all day in an air conditioned environment. Like go outside, get some fresh air, explore.
Perfect. And on that note, we actually have a question in the chat from Stephanie.
Have you found it difficult to build community within each city that you've moved to? And then how have you like navigated trying to find community?
That's a really great question. I feel like I have thankfully been able to kind of choose like my most recent cities so that I'm not in a situation where I really feel isolated. Now, I'll put that in context. I'm a big city person. And when I was looking for a job, one of my specifications was I had to be in a big city. I know it sounds really silly, but as soon as I started to narrow down my job search, I started to look at how many Korean restaurants and H Marts there were. This is very important to me that I have access to kimchi once in a month. And I can't explain why it's so important to me, but it just is. It's important for me to have access to that. And one job it checked all the boxes off. It was wonderful. The people were great. The mentorship was going to be amazing. I was going to have some great opportunities. There just wasn't diversity there. And to me, it was not worth it. I felt that I could build those things and find those opportunities and be in a city where I would feel more represented, I guess. But in a place like Dallas, like I think it is relatively easy to find those pockets, right? So whether it's like, your culture, your food, your religion, you may have to try a little bit harder if you're in a smaller place. But I'd say like if you're really committed and like things are really important to you and you're looking at residencies or fellowships or even jobs, I make a list. I'm a big Excel geek. I look at my top 3 things that are non-negotiable things. Big city, right? Diversity, and whatever my top 3rd one was, right? And if the program didn't meet it, then I had to rank it lower.
One other thing that has come up for our students in navigating these transition periods is just finances. And so people will range from having a lot of student loans to maybe not at all. Do you have any financial tips that you would offer to medical students and residents, especially ones who might be trying to figure out their next big step?
One of the things that really used to bother me was when people are like, just don't have your latte in the morning. Just stop eating avocado toast, right? If those things bring you joy and it makes you more productive as a student, as a resident, then no, you get the latte and you get the avocado toast, right? There are certain areas where you can be more frugal, and there are other areas where you feel like there is more benefit. So, for example, if it's like, sitting in a coffee shop every day and spending $10 on something so that you can really, truly study well and, get through all your slides and do your work, then I'd say, yes, that's a great investment. But if you have multiple subscriptions to services and you never use your Netflix or whatever it is, then maybe you need to start kind of looking at that. Like really take a look at your balance and see like, do I use ClassPass? Do I go to this gym? It's kind of like purging your closet. You kind of have to take a good look at like what you don't need and just let it go. Obviously, that's not going to take care of loans. What I would say about loans is, thankfully now, at least I believe a lot of people got some of their loans forgiven, which was great. I still believe in the philosophy of living, was it living like a pauper or something like that? Like even when you're something, whatever the expression is, even if you have more income as a resident, as a fellow, even as an attending, I would still live frugally. Everyone's motivation is it's like, okay, I'm an attending and I'm going to make a big purchase and I want it to be a nice car or something like that. And if it brings you joy, I think that's great. But just again, be very mindful about like, what that means and budgeting. It's like budgeting is so boring and so tedious, but is actually really important. So for me, it's like, I don't like grocery shopping. It's something I really don't enjoy. I don't like going to the supermarket and smelling the peppers and the watermelons and enjoying that experience. It's not something I like to do. I pay for a delivery service. It's worth it for me. Just think about the things that make you really happy. If it's like the Pilates membership that you have and like it makes you feel amazing, it makes you feel energized, you're productive at work, it's something you look forward to doing, you should absolutely spend money on that.
It sounds like it comes down largely to really knowing yourself and making decisions based on that. I see that Amber, you have your camera on. Did you want to ask a question?
I do. It's kind of taking a turn from what you just discussed, a little more technical related to research, especially now that medical school applicants and residency applicants have had more and more research each year as it goes by. Do you have any advice for either students who are applying or current students who are interested in either developing their research further or even just being able to balance it along with our other commitments that we have going on?
I'm not going to say I feel bad for you guys, but it is, like I said, it's getting so much harder. I don't think I would even know what to do with a research project. I mean, yes, did I try to do some things? Absolutely. But I have some mixed feelings about this sort of expectation because you're doing something just to kind of check a box off to say, yes, I did research. If you're actually doing research to learn skills about like, basic statistics or how to do a systematic review, then fine. But to do research, like you really have to have like a decent amount of training and exposure to it. And I think it's really unreasonable to ask medical students who've had zero training to be able to do something. Now, that's where having a really good mentor helps, because if you have a mentor who understands what you know, what to do, and can give you a reasonable project that you can, either jump onto or help with, I think that's great. But when you are tagged with a mentor who is not doing that and kind of abandons you, and it's like, okay, you figure it out, that's where it gets really challenging. So picking your mentor is really important. And I tell medical students this all the time because they reach out to me for projects, and sometimes I don't have anything active where I could have them as a lead. But you want to go in with, this is what I know how to do. I know how to extract data from a medical chart. That's a very useful skill that actually takes time to teach someone how to do it, right? So if you can already do that, you're really going to be like up higher than a lot of other students. If you know how to organize data into tables, even better. If you know how to read an abstract, you're getting up the ladder, right? So you just kind of see how it takes like several steps to kind of build yourself up. So being able to say like, yes, I want to do research, fine. That's great. We love working with eager medical students, but I also need to know what you are capable of doing, because I don't want to tag you onto something that you're not going to be able to do. You're going to be disappointed because you're not going to be able to get the project done on time. And then I'm going to be like, I feel bad because I wasn't able to give you the mentorship that you needed. So it's a two-way street.
On the note of making yourself a more competitive applicant, research is one huge thing. And thanks, Amber, for that question. Do you have any advice for students specifically who are interested in surgery? Any like concrete advice, technical advice, or just what you wish you would have known when you were going through the process yourself?
Surgery residency, not research, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Gosh, my path is so atypical, and maybe that will give some of you guys some hope who had very atypical paths. But I actually didn't want to be a doctor. I wanted to work for the CIA, and my parents were not thrilled with that idea. I then tried to pivot and be in the health policy era because it was kind of similar, not really. So I did my master's in public health. I did that for a few years, and I worked for the city in New York City, the health Department of Health. And then, I didn't know I wanted to do surgery. I got into medical school. I was an open book. I really, truly enjoyed everything. And not to say that that was a detriment, but it made it harder for me to decide what I wanted to do. And what I will say is your mentors and your experience and your rotations can change your life. You can have one bad month on a rotation that you thought you were going to love, and it's going to change. You're going to change your career. You're like, oh gosh, I thought I wanted to do this, but now I don't. And now you're thinking, well, what am I going to do now? So kind of think about it like, did I not enjoy this rotation because I just didn't get well with the people and the culture, whatever? Or is it just like the medicine itself that is just not for me, right? So really kind of go into those rotations like thinking, I want to be an expert in, internal medicine. I want to be an expert in surgery. Like, what is the life? Immerse yourself into that and think like, do I like this? Is this what makes me really happy, right? Like, I'm really tired, but am I still really happy? I'm not even thinking about it. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's already 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Like, the time just flew by. That's how you know that you really like something. And that's how I knew that I liked surgery, because I would wake up at ridiculous hours and I loved running around the hospital and I loved helping the interns. And I went home so excited to be able to tell my boyfriend, now husband, like what I did that day, right? And so like that excitement, when they're like, oh my gosh, you're so excited about this, but gosh, you never said anything about your other one. That's, you kind of get a sense of like what is building up to be your career. And so it's not a great answer, but it was a culmination of things that, the culture, the people, the mentorship, the operations, I mean, everything kind of came together for me.
That's a fantastic answer. Your passion is still so alive and it's like coming at me in the screen, and I really appreciate that. And this is a small thing that I like to do with all of our speakers, but the actual final note is, what is one thing that brought you joy today?
Talking to you guys, like, I feel like I'm looking at myself like, 15 years ago. And I wish that I had someone who looked like me that could be telling me this, because then I would feel more comfortable thinking about this path. And not that I was ever really scared, but it took me more time than it should have. And I think if I had seen more mentors who were women, who were surgeons, I feel like it would have been more clear for me. I don't regret at all the path that I took, because I learned so many things along the way. But I mean, who knows? You guys are so great, and I'm so excited that you guys are excited about this too.
We appreciate that so much. And just for context for everyone on the call, we actually found Dr. Park through a leadership committee event last year. It was preparing for PGY 1, I believe. And you actually met Dr. Nolan Kagetsu, and he brought you on. And you were so excited to find an organization like APAMSA that was dedicated to this effort. And you've been so excited to help us ever since. So from the bottom of my heart, we really do appreciate your willingness to be here. And thank you so much for all of your insights today.
Of course.
So that concludes our September AMA session. Thank you to everyone who attended. And for everyone who's going to listen on the podcast, please reach out if you have any questions. And we really appreciate it. So last round of applause for Dr. Park. Thank you, guys.